Hello everyone, welcome back to Edubbey Global Solution. Today what we'll be discussing is known as fiscal policy. Here, what do we have in our fiscal policy? Before we move to our fiscal policy here, we have to discuss about what government budget is. Now, what do we mean by budget and what are the reasons for government spending? Here, budget can be defined as the relationship between government revenue, that is the income, and the government spending, which is also known as the expenditure. Now let us check the reasons for government spending. Why did government spend? Government spend for four essential reasons, which are what? To influence the economic activity, that is to spend in order to increase the aggregate demand to stimulate higher output and what? Which leads to economic growth. Also to reduce market failure. Of course, this government spend on public good as it will not be financed by the private sector, and also promote equity. Of course, government provide benefits like pensions, subsidized housing for the poor, and free education to children, and also to pay interest on national debt. Of course, when government borrow, they also pay interest. Now let us move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now have the reason for taxation. Why do government levy tax on individual or firms? Now we have a compulsory payment made to the government by all people in an economy to be what? And also, what is the main source of government revenue? Of course, a compulsory payment made to the government by all people in an economy is known as what? Is known as taxes. Why the main source of revenue for government is tax. At the same time, tax is also the main source of government revenue. Now let us check. We are good to go. Now there are many reasons for levying tax from the economy, which are what? Now, what are the reasons for levying tax from individual firms? Now we have to redistribute income from the rich to the poor. Of course, higher income group usually pay more tax than the poor, and also to discourage the consumption of demerit good. Of course, to discourage harmful goods like cigarettes or alcohol. They also levy tax to protect home industry and also to influence economic activities. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now have the classification of taxes. Now we have to drag the word into the correct boxes here. Taxes can be classified into what? We have direct and indirect. And under indirect tax, we have progressive taxes, regressive taxes, and also proportional taxes. Now let us now check. Dash is the taxes on income of an individual or wealth, which include what? Income tax, corporate tax, capital gain tax, and property tax. And we also have taxes on goods and service sold, which also include added tax, custom duty, and excise duty. Now let us drag. Here I said our tax can be classified into direct and indirect. Of course, direct tax are the taxes on income of an individual or wealth. Let us drag. Now, and under direct taxes, we have income tax, that is taxes on the income of an individual, and we have corporate tax, taxes on companies, and we also have capital gain tax, that is tax on any profit arise from sales of assets held for more than 1 year. And we also have property tax here, that is tax on property or land. Here we have the second classification of taxes, which is indirect taxes. Now we have indirect tax to be the tax on goods and service sold, which also include value added tax, that is taxes included in the price of goods and services. We also have custom duty, and at the same time we have excise duty, that is tax on demerit goods like alcohol, cigarette, and so on. Now we have the remaining three classification of taxes under indirect tax. We have the taxes which burden the rich more than the poor, is known as progressive taxes. And we also have the tax which burden the poor more than the rich. Those taxes are known as regressive taxes. And the taxes which burden the poor and rich equally is known as what? Proportional taxes. Now let us check. Good, we are good to go. Let us move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now have the principle of taxation. The numbers of quality that a good tax should process includes the following. Now, number one says it must be convenient. Of course, a tax should be easy to pay, and also it must be certain. Of course, it must be easy to calculate the amount tax required to be paid by individual. It must possess the principle of equity, that is, it should be based on the individual ability to pay, and also it must be economical. Of course, the cost of collecting taxes should not be more than the revenue that will be generated, and it must also be simple in collection. We move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now have impact of taxation and one past question here. Now let us check what impact of taxation is telling us. Of course, consumer may have less disposable income to spend after income tax has been deducted. Yes, and higher income tax can also reduce the willingness to work, and producer will also have less incentive to produce if the corporate tax are too high. And for government, the impact of tax on government is to raise income, which can lead to higher spending on healthcare and education and other public expenditure. Now, one past question that we have here, we have what is the most likely to cause a more even distribution of income? We have an increase in the managers' salaries, an increase in indirect taxation, an increase in inflation, or an increase in progressive taxation. What do you think can cause a more even distribution of income? Of course, it's an increase in progressive tax. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now have what we know as fiscal policy. Of course, for us to treat fiscal policy, we have to know about budget and what government budget is telling us, and which we have done that already. Now, our fiscal policy is a government policy which adjusts government spending and taxation to influence the aggregate demand in the economy. What are we saying? Fiscal policy is also the budgetary policy because it manages the government revenue and expenditure. Of course, we have the fiscal policy here, that is, we have the taxes and the government spending. Now, let us check this one first question. What is fiscal policy? According to our definition here, let us check these options out. We have government measure designed to influence total supply in the economy. Is that so? Government decision of money supply and interest rates to influence total demand. Is that the answer? Government decision of spending and taxation designed to influence total demand, and government regulation of the foreign exchange rate to influence demand. Of course, it is the government decision of spending and taxation designed to influence total demand. That's the answer. We move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we also have one past question here. A government wants to reduce both its budget deficit, that is the expenditure over revenue, and the amount of poverty in its country. Which fiscal policy measure is most likely to achieve both this aim? Don't forget, we have the fiscal policy measure to be what? Taxes and government spending. Now, which fiscal policy measure is the most likely to achieve both aim? That is, to achieve the reduction in budgets, deficits, and the amount of poverty. We have the increase in the rate of progressive income tax, decreasing government spending on welfare benefits, decreasing the rate of progressive income tax, increase government spending on welfare benefit. Of course, it is the increase the rate of progressive income tax, that is the burden the tax more than the poor. Now, good, that is that. We move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now have what we know as fiscal policy measure. Of course, I've mentioned this earlier. The two main tools of fiscal policy are what? Taxes and spending. Now, government aims for a balanced budget. What do we understand by a balanced budget? That is, we have a balanced budget using fiscal policy. A budget is in surplus when government revenue exceed government spending, and a budget is also in deficit when government expenditure exceed government revenue, while a balanced budget is when a government revenue is equal to government spending. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we also have one past question here. What is an example of a fiscal policy measure? We have increase in the exchange rate, setting a lower interest rate, reducing the rate of corporation tax, reducing the power of trade. Remember we said our fiscal policy measure are just taxes and government spending. Here we now have the reduction of corporation tax to be our answer. The second past question is here. It's also mentioned what fiscal policy measure is. Here we have exchange rate, regulation, direct tax, and interest rate. Of course, our answer is direct tax. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now have the effect of fiscal policy on macroeconomic aim. That is, the effect of fiscal policy on government aim. Government introduced contractionary fiscal policy. What do we mean by contractionary fiscal policy? That is where government spending is cut and tax rates are increased in order to what? In order to help to control inflation. That is the general rise in the price level, which is resulting from too much growth. And the government also introduced an expansionary fiscal policy. That is where government spending is increased and tax rates are cut to stimulate what? To stimulate growth, employment, and also help to increase price. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we have past question. A government has a contractionary fiscal policy to reduce inflation. What will the government increase? Now, I just said this earlier. We have personal tax allowance, income tax rate, expenditure on infrastructure, and unemployment benefit. Of course, it is income tax rate. That's the government with increase. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we also have past question. What is included in the government's budget? Of course, we have discussed that earlier before our fiscal policy. Now, what is included in government budget? The difference between social benefit and social cost of production, the difference between investment and savings, or the balance of government revenue and government expenditure, the balance of export revenue and import expenditure. Of course, the government budget is the balance of government revenue and government expenditure, that is government spending. We move to the next slide. We also have past question. A country is experiencing unemployment. That is a situation where people who are willing to work did not see work. Now, it has a progressive income tax, that is the tax that burden the rich more than the poor, and benefit for the poor. Now, the government aims to increase employment and reduce income inequality. Which fiscal policy measure are most likely to achieve these aims? Remember, our fiscal policy measure are what? Taxes and government spending. Here, what will happen to our income taxes will be what will happen to the benefit for the poor. Here we have the decrease in lowest tax rate, increase the lowest tax rate, decrease the highest tax rate, and increase the highest tax rate, while the benefit for the poor will increase or decrease. What do you think? Which fiscal policy measure do you think it can be used to achieve this aim? Of course, is to decrease lowest tax rate so that the benefit for the poor will increase. That's correct. This will be the end of the class. Stay tuned to our website www.edubbey.com. See you in the next class.